The yellow school bus pulled away from the curb, leaving behind a cloud of diesel smoke and the echo of teenage laughter. It was 7:45 a.m. on a Monday morning in September, and Riverside High School was coming to life. Students streamed through the front doors, their backpacks slung over shoulders, chatting about weekend adventures and complaining about the early hour. Among them walked a woman in her late 20s, but she wasn't heading to a locker or rushing to meet friends. She carried a professional briefcase and wore the kind of nervous smile that only comes with first-day jitters. This was Jessica Chun, and today marked the beginning of what she hoped would be a rewarding chapter in her teaching career. The hallways of Riverside High buzzed with the familiar energy of a new school year. Freshmen looked lost, clutching their schedules and trying to navigate the maze of corridors. Seniors strutted with the confidence that comes from knowing exactly where they belonged. Teachers stood by their classroom doors, greeting students, with varying degrees of enthusiasm depending on how much coffee they'd managed to consume. Jessica had driven past this school countless times during her apartment hunting in the spring, but walking through it as a teacher felt completely different. The building was older than she'd expected, with that distinct smell of industrial cleaning products mixed with decades of teenage energy. The lockers bore the scratches and stickers of countless students who had passed through these halls, each leaving their small mark on the place. She made her way to the main office, where the secretary greeted her with a warm smile and a stack of paperwork. The woman behind the desk had clearly seen many new teachers come and go over the years, and she offered Jessica a cup of coffee along with some practical advice about parking and the best places to grab lunch. Principal Roberts emerged from his office right on schedule. He was a man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that had seen it all. As they walked toward Jessica's classroom, he filled her in on the basics, class sizes, school policies, and the general rhythm of life at Riverside High. "You'll find most of our students are good kids," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "They come from all different backgrounds, and some of them face challenges that might surprise you. But they respond well to teachers who genuinely care about them." Jessica nodded, taking mental notes as they walked. She'd chosen to teach at Riverside High specifically because she wanted to work with students who needed extra support. Coming from a more privileged background herself, she felt called to serve in a community where her efforts could make a real difference. They stopped at room 204, which would be Jessica's home base for the next 9 months. The classroom was spacious, but clearly hadn't been updated in years. The desks were arranged in neat rows, facing a whiteboard that had seen better days. Motivational posters hung on the walls, slightly faded but still carrying messages of hope and determination. "The previous teacher retired after 30 years, Principal Roberts explained. "She was beloved by students and staff alike. Those are big shoes to fill, but I have confidence in you." Jessica set her briefcase down and looked around the room, already imagining how she might rearrange the furniture to create a more collaborative environment. She'd studied the latest research on classroom management and student engagement, and she was eager to put her ideas into practice. As they continued the tour, other teachers stopped to introduce themselves. There was Mr. Wilson from the math department, who offered to help with technology issues. Mrs. Patterson from the science wing shared tips about the best copy machines. These small gestures of kindness helped ease Jessica's nerves and reminded her that she wasn't alone in this new adventure, but not everyone seemed quite so welcoming. As they walked past the gymnasium, Jessica noticed a group of students gathered near the entrance. They weren't talking loudly or causing obvious trouble, but something about their body language suggested they were the type who commanded attention without asking for it. One student in particular caught her eye. He was tall. For his age, probably around 17, with an athletic build and a confidence that seemed to radiate from him. His school uniform was worn in a way that followed the rules but pushed boundaries. Sleeves rolled up, tie loosened just enough to show he didn't care about perfection. The boy's eyes met Jessica's for just a moment as she walked past, and she felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't fear exactly, but an instinctive recognition that this was someone who could make her life either very easy or very difficult. "That's Derek," Principal Roberts said quietly, noticing her glance. "He's been with us for a while now. Senior year, finally, he's got leadership qualities, I'll say that much." The way he said it told Jessica everything she needed to know. Derek was the kind of student who led by example, but not necessarily the kind of example the school hoped for. He was someone who other students looked up to, which could be either a blessing or a curse depending on how things went. After the tour, Jessica spent the rest of the morning setting up her classroom. She rearranged the desks into small groups, hung up her own decorations, and organized her supplies. Each task helped her feel more at home in the space, more ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The first bell rang at 8:30, and Jessica's heart began to race. This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for throughout her student teaching, through her education courses, through all those late nights studying lesson plans and classroom management strategies. Her first class was sophomore English, and the students filed in with the typical mix of curiosity and skepticism that teenagers bring to everything new. They sized her up as they took their seats, whispering to each other and clearly wondering what kind of teacher she would be. Jessica had prepared a getting-to-know-you activity that was designed to be fun but also give her insight into her students' interests and backgrounds. She watched their faces as she explained the assignment, noting who seemed engaged and who looked like they might be trouble. The morning classes went smoothly. The students were polite, if not particularly enthusiastic, and Jessica began to feel like maybe this wouldn't be so hard after all. She was building confidence with each successful interaction, each small moment of connection with a student. But she hadn't met Derek yet. Lunch came and went, and Jessica used the time to review her notes and prepare for the afternoon classes. She'd heard from other teachers that the later periods could be more challenging. Students were tired, hungry, and ready for the day to be over. At 1:15, the bell rang for fifth period. Advanced English Literature, her most challenging class. Academically, but also the one she was most excited about. These were the students who had chosen to take an advanced course, which meant they were either genuinely interested in learning or looking for an easy A. The students began filing in, and Jessica noticed immediately that the energy in the room was different. These older students carried themselves with more confidence, more awareness of their place in the school hierarchy. They weren't as wide-eyed as the sophomores had been. And then Derek walked in. He didn't rush or make a big entrance. He simply appeared in the doorway, surveyed the room with the casual confidence of someone who owned the place, and made his way to a seat in the back corner. Other students seemed to naturally orient themselves around him, like planets around a sun. Jessica felt her carefully planned lessons suddenly seem less important. This was clearly going to be a test, though she wasn't sure yet what kind. She took a deep breath, smiled at the class, and began her introduction. "Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Miss Chun, and I'm excited to be your English teacher this year." Derek leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The battle lines had been drawn, though Jessica didn't know it yet. She was about to learn that some students don't just attend class, they command it. The second week of school started like any other Monday, but Jessica had no idea that her real test was about to begin. She'd gotten comfortable with her routine, arriving early, greeting students at the door, and diving into lessons with the enthusiasm that had made her want to teach in the first place. Her morning classes had been going well. The sophomore students were warming up to her, and she'd even gotten a few genuine laughs during her lesson on creative writing. She was starting to feel like maybe she'd found her rhythm at Riverside High. Then fifth period arrived. Jessica was writing the day's objectives on the whiteboard when she heard the classroom door open. She glanced at the clock, 1:17 p.m. Class had started 2 minutes ago. She turned to see Derek strolling in, not hurrying, not apologizing, just casually making his way across the room like he had all the time in the world. "Good afternoon, Derek," Jessica said politely, trying to keep her voice neutral. "We're just getting started with today's lesson." Derek didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stopped at his friend's desk and began a conversation about weekend plans, speaking just loud enough for everyone to hear. Other students glanced between Derek and Jessica, waiting to see how this would play out. "Derek, could you please take your seat so we can continue?" Jessica asked, maintaining her professional tone despite feeling her heart rate increase. He finally looked at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Oh, sorry, Miss Chun. I was just catching up with my friend here. You know how it is." He dragged out the word sorry in a way that made it clear he wasn't sorry at all. Jessica decided to pick her battles. She continued with her lesson on symbolism in literature, but she could feel Derek's presence like a weight in the room. He wasn't actively disrupting anything, but his body language, slouched in his chair, arms crossed, looking everywhere except at her, sent a clear message to the other students. The next day brought a new challenge. Derek arrived on time, which Jessica initially took as a good sign. But 15 minutes into class, his phone buzzed. Instead of ignoring it or quietly checking it, he pulled it out and began texting, his thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. "Derek, phones should be put away during class time," Jessica said, trying to sound firm but not confrontational. "It's my mom," he replied without looking up. "She's asking about my doctor's appointment. It's kind of important." Jessica felt trapped. She couldn't very well tell a student not to respond to his mother about medical issues. But something about the way he said it, the slight smirk on his face, made her suspect this wasn't entirely truthful. "Please handle it quickly and then put the phone away," she said, returning to her lesson. But Derek didn't put the phone away. 5 minutes later, it buzzed again, then again. Each time he would check it, sometimes responding, sometimes just reading. Other students began to notice, and Jessica could see them getting restless. By Wednesday, Derek had established a pattern. He would arrive right on time, never late enough to be marked tardy, but never early enough to be considered punctual. He would find small ways to test boundaries throughout the class period. Sometimes it was his phone. Sometimes it was side conversations. Sometimes it was just the way he sat in his chair, turned slightly away from her, as if her lesson wasn't worth his full attention. Jessica tried different approaches. She moved closer to his desk when teaching, hoping proximity would encourage better behavior. She tried calling on him directly, asking for his thoughts on the material. Derek would usually respond, but his answers were always just shy of being disrespectful, technically correct, but delivered with a tone that suggested he was doing her a favor. The turning point came on Thursday. Jessica was leading a discussion about character motivation in the novel they were reading when Derek raised his hand. She was surprised and pleased. Maybe he was finally engaging with the material. "Yes, Derek?" "I was just wondering," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Why we have to read this old stuff anyway? I mean, when am I ever going to use this in real life?" It was a fair question, one that many students had. Jessica had prepared for this moment, and she launched into an explanation about critical thinking skills, understanding human nature, and the ways literature helps us make sense of the world around us. But Derek wasn't finished. "I mean, no offense, Miss Chun, but you're pretty young. Have you ever even had a real job, like outside of school?" The room went silent. Jessica felt her cheeks flush, but she kept her voice steady. "I've had several jobs, Derek, and each one taught me something valuable. But right now, my job is helping you and your classmates develop the skills you'll need for whatever comes next." "Right," Derek said, nodding slowly. "But what if what comes next doesn't involve reading 100-year-old books?" Some of his friends chuckled, and Jessica could see other students looking back and forth between them like they were watching a tennis match. She realized this wasn't really about the curriculum. This was Derek establishing himself as the alpha. In the room, testing whether she would back down or fight back, Friday brought the biggest challenge yet. Jessica had planned a group activity that required students to work together on analyzing different themes in their current reading. She'd arranged the desks in clusters and was explaining the assignment when Derek stood up. "This is boring," he announced to the room. "Can't we just watch the movie instead?" A few students laughed nervously. Jessica felt every eye in the room on her. This was the moment she'd been dreading, the direct, public challenge to her authority. "Derek, please sit down so we can continue with the lesson," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Come on, Miss Chun," he said, spreading his arms wide. "Look around, nobody wants to do this." "We're all thinking the same thing. This is a waste of time." Jessica glanced around the room. Some students were looking down at their desks, clearly uncomfortable. Others were watching Derek with admiration, caught up in the drama of the moment. A few looked at her with what might have been sympathy, but none of them spoke up. "The activity is designed to help you understand the material better," Jessica said. "Please take your seat." Derek didn't move. Instead, he turned to address the class directly. "Who here would rather watch the movie than do another worksheet?" Several hands went up. Derek grinned triumphantly. "See, democracy in action." Jessica felt her carefully constructed lesson plan crumbling around her. This wasn't just about one disruptive student anymore. Derek had managed to turn the entire class against the assignment, making her look like the unreasonable one. "We're going to stick with the planned activity," she said firmly. "If you don't want to participate, Derek, you can sit quietly while the others work." "Or what?" Derek asked, his voice casual but his eyes challenging. "You'll send me to the principal's office?" "Write me up. What exactly are you going to do?" The question hung in the air like a dare. Jessica realized that Derek had been building up to this moment all week. Every small test, every boundary he'd pushed, had been preparation for this public showdown. She looked at him standing there, confident and smiling, clearly enjoying the attention. She looked at the other students, some rooting for Derek, others waiting to see if their new teacher would crumble under pressure. In that moment, Jessica made a decision that would change everything. Instead of escalating the confrontation, instead of sending him to the office or raising her voice, she did something completely unexpected. She pulled out her grade book and began taking attendance for the group activity, calmly noting who was participating and who wasn't. Then she started the timer and began moving from group to group, helping students who were working while completely ignoring Derek, who was still standing in the middle of the room. Derek stood there for another minute, clearly expecting a bigger reaction. When it became obvious that Jessica wasn't going to engage in a power struggle, he slowly sat back down, his moment of triumph feeling suddenly hollow, but Jessica knew this was just the beginning. Derek had made his move, and now it was her turn to respond. The real battle was just getting started. The weekend gave Jessica time to think. She spent Saturday morning at a coffee shop, grading papers and replaying the events of Friday's class in her mind. Derek's public challenge had rattled her more than she wanted to admit, and she knew that Monday would bring either a breakthrough or a complete breakdown of her classroom management. She'd considered all the traditional approaches, writing him up, calling his parents, sending him to the principal's office. But something told her that Derek had been down those roads before. He seemed too confident, too prepared for those consequences. Whatever game he was playing, he knew the rules better than she did. That evening, Jessica found herself thinking about her own high school experience. She'd been a good student, the kind teachers loved, always prepared, always polite, always eager to please. But she remembered the kids who weren't like her, the ones who seemed angry at the world and took it out on anyone who represented authority. She thought about her education classes, all those theories about reaching difficult students. Most of them boiled down to one simple truth. You had to understand what was driving the behavior before you could change it. Derek wasn't just being disruptive for fun. There was something deeper going on. Monday morning came too quickly. Jessica arrived at school early as usual, but this time she had a plan. Instead of dreading fifth period, she was actually looking forward to it. She'd decided to try something different, something that went against every instinct she had as a new teacher trying to establish control. Her morning classes went smoothly, but she found herself distracted, thinking about what was coming. By lunchtime, she was nervous but determined. She'd made her decision, and now she had to follow through with it. The fifth period bell rang, and students began filing into her classroom. Jessica noticed that Derek's friends seemed especially alert. today, like they were expecting another show. Derek himself strolled in right on time. That familiar, confident smile on his face. Jessica started the class as usual, but about 10 minutes in, she made an announcement that surprised everyone. Before we continue with today's lesson, I want to talk about Friday, she said, her voice calm and steady. Derek, could you stay after class? I'd like to speak with you privately. Derek's eyebrows went up slightly, but he nodded. The rest of the class seemed disappointed. They'd been hoping for another confrontation to break up the monotony of literature analysis. The remainder of the class period passed without incident. Derek didn't cause any disruptions, but he also didn't participate. He simply sat there, occasionally checking his phone, clearly wondering what Jessica had planned for their after-class conversation. When the bell rang and the other students filed out, Derek remained in his seat. Jessica waited until the room was empty, then moved to the desk next to his and sat down. This simple act, sitting beside him rather than standing over him, immediately changed the dynamic in the room. I'm not going to lecture you, Jessica said, her voice softer than Derek had ever heard it. And I'm not going to threaten you with consequences. I just want to understand something. Derek looked suspicious. Understand what? What I did wrong? Jessica said simply. You clearly don't want to be in this class, and I'm obviously not connecting with you. I'm new at this, Derek. I could use some honest feedback. This was not what Derek had expected. He'd been prepared for accusations, for punishment, for all the usual adult responses to his behavior. But Jessica's vulnerability caught him completely off guard. I don't know what you mean, he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Jessica pulled out a small notebook from her desk drawer. Can I show you something? She opened it to a page filled with her handwriting. These are notes I wrote about my first week teaching. Look at this entry. She pointed to a passage that read, Friday, Derek challenged me in front of the class. I felt completely unprepared. I wanted to cry. I don't know if I'm cut out for this. Derek stared at the page, clearly surprised by her honesty. Why are you showing me this? Because I realized something over the weekend, Jessica said. I've been so focused on trying to control the classroom that I forgot why I wanted to teach in the first place. I didn't come here to be a dictator. I came here to help students learn and grow. She flipped to another page in her notebook. Look at this. It's a list of every teacher who influenced me when I was your age. You know what they all had in common? They saw me as a person, not just a student who needed to be managed. Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different. Less guarded, more curious. So what are you saying? I'm saying I want to start over, Jessica said. I want to know what you're actually interested in, what makes you tick. Because right now, I'm just guessing, and clearly I'm not very good at it. Derek looked around the empty classroom as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. You really want to know? I really want to know. I think school is pointless, Derek said bluntly. I think most of what we learn here has nothing to do with real life. I think teachers just go through the motions because it's their job, not because they actually care about us. Jessica nodded slowly. That's fair. What would make it not pointless for you? Derek seemed genuinely surprised by the question. I don't know. I guess if it felt like it mattered somehow. Like if I could see how it connected to something I actually cared about. What do you care about? Jessica asked. Derek hesitated. You'll think it's stupid. Try me. I write, Derek said quietly, like stories and stuff. But not the kind of stuff we read in here. Real stuff about real people dealing with real problems. Jessica felt a spark of excitement. Can I read some of your writing? Why? Because I think you might be able to help me make this class better for everyone, Jessica said. What if we could find ways to connect the literature we're studying to the kind of stories you write? What if we could make it feel more relevant? Derek looked skeptical. You mean like change the whole curriculum? I mean like finding bridges between what we have to cover and what actually matters to you and your classmates, Jessica explained. The goals are the same: developing critical thinking, understanding human nature, learning to communicate effectively. But maybe we can get there through different paths. For the first time since she'd known him, Derek looked genuinely interested. You would do that? I would try, Jessica said. But I'd need your help. And I'd need you to give me a chance to prove that I'm not just another teacher going through the motions. Derek was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking it over. Finally, he looked at her directly. What would you need me to do? First, I'd need you to give me some of your writing. To read, Jessica said. Not to grade it or critique it, just to understand what kind of stories speak to you. Then I'd need you to help me figure out how to make our class discussions more engaging for everyone, not just the students who already love literature. And what do I get out of it? Derek asked. A chance to be part of something meaningful instead of just fighting against it, Jessica said. And maybe some help developing your writing skills in ways that actually matter to you. Derek stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where buses were loading students for the ride home. Jessica waited, not wanting to push too hard. I'll think about it, Derek said finally. That's all I ask, Jessica replied, as Derek gathered his things and headed for the door. He paused and looked back at her. Miss Chun? Yes? Nobody's ever asked me to help make a class better before. Well, Jessica said with a small smile, maybe it's time someone did. After Derek left, Jessica sat alone in her classroom, feeling both hopeful and terrified. She'd just made a huge gamble, essentially admitting weakness to the one student who'd been challenging her authority. But something told her it was the right move. She pulled out her notebook and wrote, Day 12. Had first real conversation with Derek, took a big risk. We'll see if it pays off. The next day would tell her if she'd made a breakthrough or just made things worse. But for the first time since school started, Jessica felt like she was actually teaching instead of just surviving. Tuesday morning arrived with the usual chaos of teenage voices filling the hallways, but Jessica felt different. She'd barely slept, wondering if her conversation with Derek had been a mistake. What if he took her vulnerability as weakness? What if he used it against her in front of the class? She got her answer during first period when she overheard two students talking near her classroom door. Did you hear Derek actually stayed after class yesterday? One of them whispered. Yeah, I thought for sure he was going to get suspended or something, the other replied. But he seemed pretty normal this morning. Jessica tried not to read too much into it, but she couldn't help feeling a tiny spark of hope. At least Derek hadn't turned their conversation into a joke for the whole school. Her morning classes went smoothly, but she found herself constantly checking the clock. Fifth period felt like it was both approaching too fast and taking forever to arrive. She'd prepared her lesson as usual, but she'd also spent time thinking about what Derek had said about wanting school to feel more relevant. When the bell rang for fifth period, Jessica positioned herself at the door to greet students as they entered. Derek walked in right on time, made brief eye contact with her, and gave a small nod. It wasn't much, but it was different from his usual swagger. Good afternoon, everyone, Jessica began once all the students were seated. Today we're going to try something a little different. She could see Derek's attention perk up slightly. Other students looked curious too. Anything different from the usual routine was bound to get their interest. We've been reading about characters who face difficult choices, Jessica continued. But instead of just analyzing what they did, I want us to think about how these situations might look in today's world. She pulled up a writing prompt on the board that she'd crafted. With Derek's feedback in mind, take a conflict from our current reading and reimagine it in a modern setting. What would this character's struggle look like if they were a teenager today? Students began to murmur with interest. This was definitely different from their usual literature analysis. Jessica watched Derek's face and saw something she hadn't seen before: genuine curiosity. You can work alone or in small groups, Jessica added. The goal is to understand the universal themes in the story by connecting them to experiences that feel real to you. As students began to organize themselves, Derek surprised everyone by raising his hand. Can we share our ideas with the class when we're done? Jessica tried not to show her excitement. Absolutely. I'd love to hear what you come up with. The Next 45 minutes were unlike any class period Jessica had experienced at Riverside High. Students were engaged, talking animatedly about their projects and asking thoughtful questions. Derek had partnered with two other students who rarely participated in class discussions, and she could hear them having a genuine conversation about character motivation and modern social issues. When it came time to share, Derek's group volunteered to go first. He stood up with confidence, but this time it felt different. Not the aggressive confidence of someone looking for a fight, but the assured presence of someone who had something worthwhile to say. "We took the main character's struggle with family expectations," Derek began, "and set it in a modern high school. Our character is a senior whose parents want him to go to college and become a doctor, but he wants to be a musician." As Derek continued presenting, Jessica watched the other students. They were actually listening, nodding along, clearly relating to the scenario. When he finished, several hands went up with questions and comments. "That's exactly like my cousin's situation," one student said. "His parents won't even let him audition for the school band." "Yeah, but don't parents usually know what's best?" Another student countered. "I mean, how many people actually make it as musicians?" What followed was the kind of rich discussion Jessica had dreamed of having with her students. They were debating, questioning, sharing personal experiences, and making connections between literature and their own lives. Derek wasn't dominating the conversation, but he was participating thoughtfully, asking good questions and building on other students' ideas. When the bell rang, several students groaned. They wanted to keep talking. As they packed up their things, Jessica heard one student say to Derek, "That was actually pretty cool. I never thought about books like that before." Derek was the last to leave, and as he walked past Jessica's desk, he paused. "That was better," he said simply. "Thank you," Jessica replied. "Your group did excellent work." Derek nodded and headed toward the door, but then he turned back. "Miss Chun, I wrote something last night. After our talk yesterday. It's not great, but would you still want to read it?" Jessica's heart nearly jumped out of her chest. "I would love to read it." Derek pulled a folded piece of paper from his backpack and handed it to her. "It's about a kid who thinks he's tougher than he really is," he said, then quickly left before she could respond. Jessica waited until the hallway was empty before unfolding the paper. The story was handwritten in Derek's surprisingly neat handwriting, and as she read, her eyes grew wide. It was about a teenager named Alex who acted tough at school because he was afraid of being seen as weak. The character was clearly based on Derek himself, but the level of self-awareness and emotional insight in the writing was remarkable. The story described Alex's home life, taking care of younger siblings while his mother worked 2 jobs, trying to be the man of the house. While still being a kid himself, the writing was raw and honest, describing how Alex used anger and defiance to mask his fear and exhaustion. There was a scene where Alex snapped at a teacher who was trying to help him, and the story explored his immediate regret and shame. Even as he felt trapped by the image he'd created for himself, Jessica read the story twice, feeling her understanding of Derek completely shift. This wasn't just a troublemaker looking for attention. This was a young man carrying responsibilities that would challenge many adults, trying to maintain his pride while struggling with circumstances beyond his control. The next day, Jessica arrived at school with a new plan. She'd spent the evening researching community resources and thinking about how to help Derek without making him feel like a charity case. She'd also prepared a response to his story that she hoped would encourage him to keep writing. Derek's behavior in class continued to improve throughout the week. He wasn't disruptive, he participated in discussions, and he seemed genuinely interested in the material when it was presented in ways that felt relevant to his life. Other students began to follow his lead, and Jessica found herself managing a classroom full of engaged teenagers instead of trying to control a group of reluctant prisoners. On Friday, Derek stayed after class without being asked. "Did you read it?" he asked, nodding toward the story he'd given her. "I did," Jessica said, choosing her words carefully. "Derek, you're a talented writer, really talented. But more than that, you have something important to say." Derek looked pleased but also vulnerable. It's just stuff that happens, nothing special. The best writing comes from real experience, Jessica said. And your perspective matters. Have you ever thought about sharing your writing with others? Like who? Well, there's a youth writing group that meets at the community center on weekends. And there are contests and scholarships for student writers. But more immediately, I think your classmates would benefit from hearing your voice. Derek considered this. What do you mean? I mean that when you speak up in class, people listen. You have natural leadership abilities, Derek. The question is how you want to use them. Over the following weeks, Derek began to emerge as a different kind of leader in the classroom. Instead of using his influence to disrupt, he started encouraging other students to participate in discussions. He shared his own writing with the class, which opened the door for other students to share their creative work too. Jessica watched this transformation with amazement and pride. Derek was becoming not just a better student, but a mentor to his classmates. The angry, defiant teenager who tried to break her down was revealing himself to be a thoughtful, caring young man who'd simply been protecting himself the only way. He knew how, but the most important change was yet to come. Jessica was about to discover the real reason behind Derek's behavior, and it would change everything she thought she knew about reaching difficult students. 3 months into the school year, Jessica had grown accustomed to the new rhythm of her fifth period class. Derek had transformed from her biggest challenge into one of her most reliable students, and the entire classroom dynamic had shifted as a result. Other students were more engaged, discussions were livelier, and Jessica felt like she was finally becoming the teacher she'd always wanted to be, but she was about to learn something that would put everything into perspective. It started on a Tuesday morning when Jessica received an email from the school counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez. The subject line read, "Student concern, Derek Thompson." Jessica's heart immediately began racing. Had Derek gotten into trouble? Had his old behavior returned? She opened the email with trembling fingers and read, "Hi Jessica, I wanted to let you know that Derek's family situation has become more challenging recently. His mother lost her second job last week, and there may be some impact on his school performance. I thought you should be aware since he's been doing so well in your class. Let me know if you notice any changes in his behavior or if he needs additional support." Jessica stared at the email, pieces of a puzzle suddenly clicking into place. Derek's story about Alex taking care of younger siblings while his mother worked 2 jobs, that hadn't been fiction, it had been his reality. And now that reality was getting even harder. She looked up Derek's academic record, something she realized she should have done months ago. What she found shocked her. Derek wasn't just a troublemaker who'd been held back, he was actually a bright student, whose grades had been inconsistent due to frequent absences and incomplete assignments. His test scores were well above average, but his overall GPA suffered because he often missed school or fell asleep in class. The pattern became clear. Derek had been carrying adult responsibilities while trying to maintain his education. His aggressive behavior wasn't just teenage rebellion, it was the defense mechanism of someone who felt overwhelmed and alone. That afternoon, Jessica watched Derek more carefully during fifth period. He participated in the discussion as usual, but she noticed things she'd missed before. The way he kept checking his phone, not out of disrespect, but because he was worried about his younger siblings. The tiredness in his eyes despite his engagement with the material. The way he sometimes seemed to drift off, as if his mind was somewhere else entirely. After class, Derek approached her desk. "Miss Chun, I might need to miss some classes next week. I'm trying to find a part-time job to help my mom out." Jessica's heart ached. Here was this 17-year-old boy, worried about supporting his family while still trying to graduate high school. "Derek, can we talk about this? There might be resources available to help." Derek shook his head. "We don't take charity. My mom's been working since she was 15. We'll figure it out." "It's not charity," Jessica said gently. "It's community support. There's a difference." Over the next few days, Jessica quietly researched every possible resource she could find. She reached out to the school social worker, contacted local community organizations, and even looked into emergency assistance programs. She was determined to help Derek's family without making him feel like a charity case. The breakthrough came when Jessica remembered Derek's writing talent. She'd been thinking about it for weeks, impressed by the depth and authenticity of his stories. On Friday, she approached him with an idea. "Derek, I want to talk to you about something. There's a scholarship program for student writers that I think you'd be perfect for." Derek looked skeptical. "I told you, we don't take charity." "This isn't charity," Jessica said firmly. "This is you earning recognition for your talent. The scholarship provides mentorship, publishing opportunities, and yes, some financial support. But only for students who demonstrate exceptional writing ability." She pulled out a folder she'd prepared. "I've been saving some of your writing assignments and the stories you've shared with me. Derek, you have a gift. You write about real experiences with honesty and insight that most professional writers would envy." Derek looked through the folder, seeing his own work compiled and organized. "You kept all of this?" "Of course I did. You're telling important stories about experiences that matter. That's what real writers do." Jessica pulled out another document. "There's also a youth mentorship program downtown where older students help younger kids with homework and life skills. It pays $15 an hour, and they specifically look for young people who understand what it's like to face challenges." Derek's eyes lit up. "You mean like getting paid to help kids?" "Exactly. Kids who might be going through some of the same things you've experienced. You'd be helping them with schoolwork, but also serving as a positive role model." For the first time since she'd known him, Derek looked genuinely excited. "That sounds actually pretty cool." "I thought you might like it," Jessica said. "And Derek? The application requires a writing sample and an essay about your own experiences. I think you'd be perfect for it." Over the following weeks, Jessica helped Derek prepare his applications. She worked with him after school, helping him polish his essays and organize his writing portfolio. But more importantly, she watched him discover his own potential. Derek got both the scholarship and the mentorship job. The scholarship provided recognition of his writing talent and connected him with other young writers who shared his passion for authentic storytelling. The mentorship position gave him steady income while allowing him to make a difference in other kids' lives. But the most remarkable change was in Derek himself. As his confidence grew and his stress about his family's financial situation decreased, he began to emerge as a true leader in the classroom. He started a creative writing club that met during lunch, encouraging other students to share their own stories. He tutored struggling classmates, patiently helping them understand difficult concepts. One day in late spring, Jessica overheard a conversation between Derek and a ninth-grade student who'd been acting out in several classes. "Look, I get it," Derek was saying. "You're angry, and you want everyone to know it. But here's the thing, acting tough doesn't actually make you tough. It just makes everyone think you're a problem." "Easy for you to say," the younger student replied. "You don't know what it's like?" "Actually, I do," Derek said quietly. "I spent 3 years trying to prove I was tougher than everyone else. You know what it got me? Nothing. I almost didn't graduate because I was so busy fighting battles that didn't matter." "So what changed?" Derek glanced toward Jessica's classroom. "I met a teacher who saw through all my noise and realized I wasn't really angry. I was scared. She helped me figure out that being strong doesn't mean being mean. It means taking care of the people who matter to you." Jessica felt tears in her eyes as she listened. This was the same boy who tried to break her down on his first day in her class, who challenged her authority and made her question whether she was cut out for teaching at the end of the school year. During the senior awards ceremony, Derek was recognized not just for his academic improvement, but for his leadership and community service. As he walked across the stage to receive his scholarship award, Jessica thought about the journey they'd both taken. The fatal mistake hadn't been Derek's attempt to break her down. It had been the mistake of two people who'd initially seen each other as adversaries instead of allies. Derek's mistake had been thinking that pushing away help would make him stronger. Jessica's mistake had been trying to control Derek instead of understanding him, but those mistakes had led to something beautiful. Derek had learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness and that accepting help didn't diminish his strength. Jessica had learned that sometimes the most challenging students aren't the ones who need the most discipline. They're the ones who need the most understanding. Years later, Jessica would receive a letter from Derek, written from his first year of college where he was majoring in social work. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself," he wrote. "You taught me that being strong means lifting others up, not tearing them down." The letter was signed, "Your former student and forever grateful friend Derek," and at the bottom, in smaller handwriting, "P.S. I'm still writing, and I'm still helping kids who remind me of who I used to be." Jessica kept that letter in her desk drawer, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come from the battles we almost lose.